Lieutenant Ashe, you've reached the pinnacle in the all-white sport of American tennis. Did you find that being black was a handicap in getting there?
It certainly was at the beginning. It's always tough for any black youngster to get started because of the basic structure of the game, especially the amateur game. But after you're fairly well established, it gets easier and easier. And after a while, it's really an advantage being black.
In Los Angeles, California, in color, Face the Nation. A spontaneous and unrehearsed news interview with Army Lieutenant Arthur Ashe, Jr., winner of this week's first U.S. National Open Tennis Championship and a member of the United States Davis Cup team. Lieutenant Ashe will be questioned by Bud Collins, columnist of the Boston Globe, Haywood Hale Broun, and CBS News correspondent Martin Negronsky. We shall resume the interview with Lieutenant Ashe in a moment.
Lieutenant Ashe, I find it rather intriguing that you should say that being black is an advantage now in the game of tennis. How do you mean that?
Well, at the present time, I'm the only black player playing in the class of tennis that is recognized by the public, so to speak. As contrasted with the beginning that I mentioned earlier, wherein most of the tennis players and the game itself is built around member clubs of the USLTA, that's the United States Lawn Tennis Association. And most of these clubs are either country clubs or tennis clubs. With very few exceptions are they small, publicly oriented clubs. And black people just are not members of country clubs and tennis clubs. So at the beginning, you really have to go outside the scope of normal tennis activity to sort of get started. That is, you have to find some benefactor, both financial and spiritual, to help you get started, as I did with Dr. Johnson in Lynchburg, Virginia. I was very fortunate to have met up with him when I was 10 years old, and he got me started on the right track.
Lieutenant, it has been said that the accomplishments of black athletes, which are in greater measure than their proportion of the population, advance the cause of the whole black community. Do you really think that's true?
I don't think it's wholly true. I think it's partly true as it applies to specific ways in which black athletes can use their influence and their power to wield tools that will affect progress. It's something to say you're the heavyweight champion of the world or you're the Triple Crown winner, but if you really can't parlay this influence and this power to achieve practical progress, it's sort of a Pyrrhic victory at best.
Arthur, I guess I'm going to call you Arthur because as a former corporal, I'm ill at ease with officers, sir.
Right.
But you mentioned these clubs, the club structure of the USLTA. Now, you won 2 weeks ago the National Amateur at Longwood in Boston. You won the National Open at the West Side Tennis Club, Forest Hills in New York, and now you're playing the Pacific Southwest Open in Los Angeles. These are actually bastions of white supremacy, not likely that they'll take in any Negro members. Do you feel comfortable not only performing at these clubs, but actually earning money for these clubs with your presence?
As far as the comfort end is concerned, I've gotten used to that, to me sticking out like a sore thumb. On the tennis court, that is. I've never really had any problems with the Los Angeles Tennis Club or the West Side Tennis Club or Longwood, although I'm sure if I had come along maybe 15 or 20 years earlier, things might have been different. But I think the time span really sort of explains the progress that is being made. Everything isn't a bowl of cherries, but still it's better than it was 20 years ago. And we must admit that, because just 20 years ago, Jackie Robinson was subjected to all sorts of invectives and racial slurs on and off the baseball diamond.
Well, it's better, Lieutenant, but is it good enough?
No, it's not good enough. Well, of course, I'm thinking about the ideal world. I don't think it'd really ever be the tennis world or the outside world will ever really be completely free of prejudice of some sort.
But in terms of moving toward that ideal world, some people have suggested that the success of the Negro athlete in a funny way, gratifies the white community, which then says, well, look, he's a tennis champion, he's a football player, he's a baseball player, he is an Olympic champion, and we say to the world, we give him an opportunity. We then seal you off into that one area and penalize you elsewhere, don't we?
That's true, I think, for the large part. Two things I can say about that. One, the other sports which enjoy more publicity and obvious public acclaim than tennis, like the team sports, football, baseball, basketball, track, so forth, they all have more than one black athlete and competing. In fact, black athletes dominate these sports by and large proportionately. And I think their situation is radically different than mine. And it is true they are heroes on the diamond or on the basketball court or on the football field, and off the court things are different because the population of these teams is made up of people from all walks of life, from all sections of the country, with all sorts of political and inborn prejudices or what have you.
Now, you said there are all sorts of attitudes.
Right.
Black people, like anyone else, are going to have a variety of attitudes.
That's true.
Until very recently, you have publicly not had an attitude at all. I think that's fair to say. And very recently, you have begun, I think, quite thoughtfully to enunciate something. What was the chain of your thinking?
Well, it's really sort of wound up in the thought that no man is an island, and as I said to Martin earlier, as you get better and better, and you come before the public eye more and more, if you happen to be black in these times, maybe not 50, 30 years ago, but in these times, 1968, it's really a mandate that you do something. You must. For instance, Satch Sanders of the Boston Celtics has done a lot in the ghettos there. Jim Brown is doing a lot of things. And he has his Negro Industrial and Economic Union, his branch offices throughout the U.S. And there are other athletes and other black leaders, period, who are using their positions of power and influence to wield some practical progress. So it's just simply saying to myself, Arthur, you must do something. You just cannot sit by and let the world go by.
But then what did you say to yourself before? I mean, you were at one point saying, I've got to let the world go by.
There was that time when you wanted to sit back and enjoy your status as the black lining in the white cloud.
Right. I think part of it was due to the fact that early when I was playing, I was simply awed by everything. Having come from humble beginnings in Richmond, Virginia, Virginia mired in segregation then, and to this day, there's a lot of segregation and prejudice present in Virginia and throughout the South and North, for that matter. But when you come north, so to speak, to use the phrase, you're awed by everything. And after the novelty of it wears off and you're not awed anymore, and you're able to put all the pieces together, you see, well, things really aren't the way they should be, and you're in a position now to change rather than just bend with the wind.
Let's take another facet of this whole problem of being black and what really is it, with your conspicuous exception in all-white sport. Other night I had dinner in New York with some friends of mine who brought up the question of Mrs. Carl Rowan, who's a colleague of mine.
Yes.
Washington Tennis Club, and she's not permitted to play in certain tennis clubs.
Right.
Now, let us suppose one of these tennis clubs, without naming names, forbid her to play there, and you were asked to play an exhibition match there. How would you feel about playing?
Well, it sounds like an obvious contradiction in the beginning.
Yeah.
Mrs. Rowan is the wife of a former ambassador and now a public official.
Well, a very distinguished colleague of mine.
True.
He's going back to journalism.
I don't think this very same club who refused Mrs. Rowan would accept me because I'm Arthur Ashe.
Well, I think they would. That's the point.
You think they would? Well, taking the instance that they would, no, I wouldn't. But I know that some of the clubs that I've played at before, and some that I haven't played, for instance, when I was here at UCLA going to school, there were some tournaments that I couldn't go to even here in Southern California because I was a Negro. But after I got better and better and I was known as a fairly good tennis player nationally and internationally, now they want to invite me.
Okay, now you broke it for yourself, but suppose they still close the door on your fellows, then what?
I think I'd refuse to play there. As I was going to say, it's one thing for me to be a member of a club. It's another thing for me to play. I'm not really out overtly to change membership policies of private clubs. A private club can really do what it wants. It's, you know, a private club being a private club. But most of the tournaments, I'm sure Bud will agree, are played at these clubs, and they allow me to play, although membership may be something else, even if I were socially or economically able to do so.
Have you ever raised this with your fellow team members?
Yes, we've talked about it.
How would they feel about backing you up?
I think they would. I'm pretty sure they would. In fact, I'd stake anything, my reputation or anything you'd want to bet on it. We're a pretty closely knit bunch. We do anything we want here. There's no real prejudice on the Davis Cup team. When I say real, nothing that really applies to me personally, other than just institutionalized segregation or prejudice against all black people in general in the U.S. But there are 7 team members, 1 captain, 1 trainer. We get along famously. And I go out with them socially all the time, and my best friend's white. And sounds funny to turn it around.
Some of your best friends are whites.
Right. My best friend is one of my Davis Cup teammates, and they don't care who I date or who I go out with or where I go, and we do things together, and there's no apparent prejudice in our team at all. As I say, tennis is different, and the Davis Cup team this year's especially is radically different from those in the past.
Well, we'll dig into this a bit more. We have to interrupt for a moment. We'll continue the interview with Lieutenant Ashe in a moment. Lieutenant, let's move this business of being a black athlete and a suburban into another sport. Let's take Cassius Clay. Refused to be drafted, faces a prison sentence. Really joining the whole sort of black power, extremist black power structure.
Right.
Tries to incite racial hatred. Now, that's his method. What do you think of it?
Well, I'm adamantly opposed to separatism, and I think integration, the long-run goal, must be kept in mind, regardless of short-run objectives, which seems now to be in the U.S. to be black pride, economic, political, and spiritual independence from the black community, a feeling that you don't really have to depend on anyone who's white to help you along. To that extent, I'm all for it, because I think that's really in keeping with American traditions. I think black power is as positively stated and defined, is not un-American. I think it's very American. It's like getting together voting blocks or groups of people who have different or similar views on similar issues together and voting as a unit to further their own cause. This is just the American way. I think they're the same thing, really.
Now, some Negro athletes have felt, and apparently now will not do it in organized fashion, that American Negro athletes shouldn't go to the Olympics, that the black athlete has been systematically discriminated against, and that to go and represent this country in the Olympics is an acceptance of the justice of that discrimination. Do you agree with any part of that?
Well, that's a very complex question. There are lots of ways of looking at it, depending on how you want to define your immediate objective of keeping South Africa out. To begin with, I hate South Africa with a vengeance. I mean, I think what South Africa and what Rhodesia is about to do is just terrible. I mean, it's just the worst thing imaginable. I mean, how some humans could do what they do to other humans is beyond me, really. And so South Africa is also in the Davis Cup. But in the Olympics, where there are a lot of us black athletes present, and we probably would win quite a few of the events or count for a lot of the medals, I think on the surface of it, I don't think the boycott would have been good at all. I would have voted against it if we were voting individually, and I were an Olympic athlete. I would have voted against it.
Well, you'd rather demonstrate that you do have a superiority, a physical and a professional or amateur, call it what you like, an athletic superiority in this way, than to boycott it. You think that that's more effective?
Well, to put it another way, to explain it another way, I think there are better ways of protesting.
Yeah.
That is one way of protesting, of saying simply, I don't like South Africa. Sure. But there are better and more effective ways to do it, I think.
Well, to beat their athletes, you mean?
That's one way.
Yeah.
For instance, I think a good example, this year we might have played South Africa in Davis
You were
Cup.
considering boycotting,
Right,
weren't you, and
I think
dropping
you were
from
the first
team.
one to call me about it. And obviously I had thought about it. And if we had played South Africa this year, but they lost to West Germany, if we had played South Africa, we would have had choice of ground. That is, we could decide where in the U.S. we wanted to play the match. And our captain, Donald Dell, was considering all sorts of alternative sites, and I said, there is no way in the world you're going to play that match here in the U.S. I mean, there'll be riots. You have to play it under armed guard. It looked like an army post. You have to play it at an army post. That's where you have to play it somewhere. But I think, rather than boycotting, I think a much better way to do it would have been to sort of relinquish our choice of ground, right, and go to Johannesburg and beat them down there. I mean, right. I would think of nothing better than beating both the South Africa singles player right in their own backyard.
You know, Lieutenant, the parallel that occurs to me is Jesse Owens in the Olympic Games in the time of Hitler.
Right.
But what
Do you
did
feel
that
that way
accomplish?
about it?
It's a little different. That was 1936 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Times are radically different. Whole schools of thought and attitudes have changed since then. I really don't know if I can compare the two time periods today.
Well, I meant it in terms of the whole Nazi myth of racial superiority.
Right. I'm sure that quite a few Negroes, possibly Jesse Owens at the time, might have really felt inside that they were inferior. But that, of course, we're trying to rid ourselves of this feeling now.
But do you think, I mean, we're now just speculating about what's in people's minds. The point I got to earlier was, have all these accomplishments, and the accomplishments of the black athlete is far beyond his proportion of the population. I wonder whether it has advanced the total cause of the black people in this country at all, or whether it has simply made it possible for X number of fortunate young men to make money, and has possibly misled X number of other less fortunate young men into trying it and ending up without any skill.
Well, I think it has helped. Certainly, it has not hurt. I think in the long run, that is. It may have hurt in the short run in some specific ways, but again, I say you can be the heavyweight champion of the world, or the fastest runner, the best broad jumper, or what have you. But if you can't parlay this talent into achieving practical progress, then it's really sort of sliding sideways rather than going forward. I think that's the difference that you can see between 1936 and today.
Yeah.
1936, Jesse Owens comes back with 4 gold medals. What did he do with 1936? The environment wasn't very receptive then. I mean,
to run against a horse.
Right, there wasn't much you can do. But today...
Now you're the champ. What are you going to do with it?
Right. Well, my current brainstorm, one I've been talking to with Whitney Young, the Urban League director, and Jim Brown's NIEU office in New York, and I'm going to start it in New York, is to get all the black athletes and all the white athletes who want to get together in the New York area, all the professional ones especially, but I'd really want all the black athletes I could, just to get together, and once we got together, we could really decide where to throw our weight, because most of the black athletes are superstars of some sort in that locale. And I think with this base, with this influence, if we got together, we could, certainly with certain alliances, we could do quite a bit.
Well, you must have something in the back of your mind.
Well,
what is it?
mainly I think athletes work better with kids. I think this is to the good for a long-run effect. If you can, at the beginning, when a kid's 2, 3, or 4, impress on his mind that all people really are equal, they are the same, they should have the same advantages. There should not be separatism. All the good and positive aspects of American life, if you can get the kids started off in 21 or 2 generations, it's got to pay off. And I think athletes really are very much the idols of a lot of the young. And that's where Whitney Young, with the Urban League, wants me to work. He wants me to work with kids. And the other area is also getting more middle-class blacks involved. A lot of them are very apathetic. I was that way myself, and I hope to change this.
What about the individual weight of Arthur Ashe, all 148 pounds of it?
Soaking
Do you think
wet.
you can... change things by your presence. Are more blacks going to want to play tennis because of you? And is the USLTA going to make an effort to bring blacks into the junior development programs as well as the whites?
I think they will. Already, to talk about bringing blacks into the mainstream of American amateur tennis, I guess you know of Grant Golden's project in Chicago,
Yes.
which I think is very commendable, and he's really stuck his neck out on the thesis that a lot of black kids really are very athletic, and if we can just channel this athletic ability into the tennis world instead of some other sport, we can come up with some pretty good champions, and I think he'll do fairly well. As far as on a national scale, our president, and I might say a very progressive and forward-minded president, Mr. Kelleher, of the USLTA, he did get passed this year an anti-discrimination clause in our bylaws, whereby if any tournament is held at any club which has discriminatory policies as far as people playing there, not membership policies, but just as far as anybody who's qualified to play there, the results of that tournament will not be used for ranking. And I think this is an important first step, and pressure was brought to bear by myself and a few others, the American Tennis Association, and some other people. I think the next step would be to withdraw the sanctions completely. And we are, when I say we, I mean myself, even my Davis Cup captain here, Donald Dell, World Tennis Magazine's editor, Gladys Hellman. We are looking for test cases to test this rule out. When we find overt, specific acts of prejudice by member clubs at whole tournaments, we will take action in writing to the president, and we'll really put some teeth into this law.
This is maybe an impossible question, because it asks you to extrapolate philosophically, but you have, more than most people, you have changed your attitude over a fairly short period of time.
Right.
With there are a great many familiar black attitudes, ranging from the kind of extreme humbleness of certain Southern groups which don't wish to be noticed,
Right.
to an extreme on the other side of absolute separatism and departing from any connection with the white community. Because you're a young man and a thoughtful man, do you think you've stopped, or do you feel that you still have a ways to go? Not necessarily in any direction that you want to specify. Have you hardened your own attitude yet?
I really have. And the news media is partly to blame. And it's partly reinforced some things and has sort of led me to believe that some other things are not quite what they made up to be. But the TV screen, for example, when you see results of bombings by Klan members, or results of looting, rioting, and burning, especially your own homes and your own shops and businesses, and people who are killed for various social reasons here in the U.S., I mean, it really hits you if you've got any brains at all that you've got to do something. I mean, you just can't sit by and let the world go by, especially if you're in a position to do something. As far as how far I'll extend this transformation of myself, I don't really know. And I think it depends in large part, getting back to the Jesse Owens versus myself theory, to the receptiveness of the environment. I think the American public is becoming more and more receptive to racial progress. I think they're more and more becoming acclimated to the thought that in the long run, integration is going to come. Formerly, I think maybe 2 or 3 generations back, they said, well, we're going to fight it tooth and nail all the way down to the bottom. But now, they seem in the back of their mind to think that, well, I know it's going to come, and we're going to let it come, but it's going to be slowly.
How about the black American public? Do you find that any of them regard you in a sense as an Uncle Tom because you take this position?
Quite a few. And possibly justifiably so in some instances, and possibly not justified in some instances. I think what it might have been liberal, say, 30 years ago in Jesse Owens' day would be conservative now.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Ashe. I regret we have run out of time. And thank you very much for being here to Face the Nation. A word about next week's guest in a moment.
Today on Face the Nation, U.S. National Open Tennis champion Lieutenant Arthur Ashe, Jr. was interviewed by Bud Collins, columnist of the Boston Globe, and Haywood Hale Broun. CBS News correspondent Martina Gronsky led the questioning. Today's interview was brought to you by the Continental Insurance Companies of New York. Next week, Face the Nation will be seen at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. In the first of a series of programs with presidential aspirants, former Governor George Wallace of Alabama, candidate of the American Independent Party, will be interviewed over most of these stations. That's 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time next Sunday. Face the Nation was recorded yesterday at Television City in Hollywood.